I'm going to try and do this slightly differently this evening. I'm going to share my screen with you this evening, so hopefully you can see some of the notes as we go through the course of the evening. So just to explain to you what the aim is this evening. In this session this evening, we're going to try and do the following three things. Number one, we're going to reflect a little bit on the Geirus process, on conversion. What is it? What does the Torah say about it? And a little bit of background information. We're then going to look at some laws relating to conversion, some fascinating halachot and Jewish law. And then I'm going to share with you some remarkable stories about the most famous converts in Jewish history, both past and present. So that is our agenda this evening. That is our aim. And I hope we can have an interactive session. You can take part and ask questions as we go through. So let's begin with, of course, the Torah. What does the Torah say about conversion? Now, before we even begin with this, I think the whole world's attention right now is focused very much on the events taking place in the United States. There is a new president about to be inaugurated, and I want to share with you, before I go any further, just a short clip about perhaps one of the most famous converts that you may have all heard of. Let me share this with you, and I'm going to talk about it straight afterwards. This is just by way of introduction to get everybody excited about this evening's session. Let's have a look at this.
Thank you very much, everybody. You just like me because my daughter happens to be Jewish, right? She has a great husband, Jared, and I'll tell you what, Ivanka could not be happier, and she's very proud. The only bad news, I can't get her on Saturday. I call and call. I can't speak to my daughter anymore on Saturday, but that's okay.
So we all know that Ivanka Trump is a convert, and it's fascinating because actually today, when I was preparing for the share, I reached out to the rabbi who converted her. I contacted him, and obviously he told me that he never discusses the details of individual cases for confidentiality. But one thing he did tell me was that in one of the conversations he had with Jared and Ivanka is the ability they have to make a Kiddush Hashem or Chilul Hashem, depending on how they run their lives. And this rabbi said to me that so far he's seen tremendous Kiddush Hashem, how she's always tried to make sure her children have had a Jewish education, gone to Jewish schools. They're now moving to Miami Beach, and one of her first questions was phoning the rabbi, what is the best Orthodox Jewish school to send my children to? So I thought that was an interesting way to begin this evening's session by way of introduction, just to get us all, so to speak, in the mood to talk about conversion. Now, with that said, I want to share with you what the Torah says about conversion, because the Torah says a great deal. And it begins with what? Does anyone want to unmute themselves and tell me the very first time in the Torah we learn about conversion? What is the very first time in the Torah that we learn about conversion? Anyone want to make a suggestion?
Naomi
and Ruth.
Much earlier. Much earlier. Good guess, but no.
Moses' wife.
Great guess as well, but even earlier.
Abraham.
Absolutely correct. In fact, the Torah tells us Avraham, right? Vayelech Avraham kasher dibar elav Hashem, vayelech ito Lot, Avraham ben chamesh shanim, v'shivim shana b'seitu mecharan. And it says over there, Rashi says that he took with him souls that he had acquired in Haran. What does it mean, souls? Rashi explains that Avraham would convert the men, and Sarah would convert the women. They were the first, so to speak, group of converts. They were converting all the people who started to believe in God. It was a polytheistic society, and this is where it all begins. And we see throughout the Torah many references to converts. In fact, in the book of Exodus, we all know how the Torah tells us, right, you shall not wrong a stranger or oppress the stranger, right, in the lands of Egypt. It's so important to treat people who have gone through the conversion process with the utmost of respect. It's important to treat every human being with respect. There's an extra mitzvah in the Torah in the way in which we treat converts. Now, it's an interesting thing, by the way, converts are generally referred to as the children of Abraham and Sarah, right? Abraham and Sarah are considered the forebearers of Judaism. They were the first Jews. But it goes more than that, and that's one of the reasons why we know the Shulchan Aruch tells us when a person converts to Judaism, what's their parents' Hebrew names? It's Ben Avraham, right? That's the name, or Bat Avraham. That's the name they are given. We see other examples in Vayikra and Devarim, right? When a stranger resides in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger resides amongst you, right? You shall show him love, because why, says the Torah? You are strangers in the lands of Egypt. There's a certain level of empathy. We've been there. We know what it's like to be a stranger, to come into a new society. We need to be empathetic and open them with open arms as well. In Devarim, v'ahavtem et hageh, you shall love the stranger. There's an actual mitzvah in the Torah to show love to a ger. And actually, there's a fascinating Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvot, Commandment 207, describes that there's a mitzvah to love people who have gone through conversion. And the source, of course, is not only v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, where you should love every person and love your neighbor like yourself, but also v'ahavtem et hageh, you shall love the stranger. And this is really, really important. And the Gemara goes on to describe anyone who mistreats a convert, anyone who insults them, anyone who behaves badly towards them. Not only have they transgressed the regular important precept of not treating people badly, but there's an extra protection for them. Hashem, so to speak, is watching over them, proud of them. And the Mechilta talks about this as well, right? In the verse, do not wrong a convert. It means to say that you need to be so careful with your words. Minstock mentioned last week how never reminding somebody of their past, where they've come from, what they did previously. And it's really, really important. May I add, any non-Jew can become a Jew through conversion. But once they convert, as Diane Minstock spoke about last week, there's no going back. They are considered Jewish in every single regard, and they have that same relationship with the Almighty. But what's really important, and I think this is really important to stress when we are learning the topic of conversion, is every single human being, whether they are Jewish or Gentile, from whatever background they come from, can have a relationship with God. And unlike some other religions, Judaism does not demand that all people need to convert to be spiritual, to have a relationship with Hashem. Maimonides explains that by keeping the 7 Noachide laws, the 7 basic laws of mankind, he can earn, or she can earn, a fantastic place in heaven. And it reminds me of a story. My first trip to Poland, I've been blessed to be to Poland many times, but on one of my first trips to Poland, I met the most remarkable, righteous Gentile. His name was Joseph Maizeneck. This was 12 years ago. At the time, he was a man of almost 90. And he told us the story of how at the age of 16, his father, he was then a teenage boy, his father had hid a group of 12 Jews in the family barn. The family were farmers, and within a secret room underneath the pig's trough in their farmyard, they made a secret room and they hid 12 Jews for 2 years. He described how one night the Nazis came, as they often did. They stormed the place. They demanded to sleep there the night in the barn. He managed somehow to get a message to the Jews hiding underneath the pig's trough that they're going to be Nazis sleeping in this room tonight. Please make sure you do not even so much as sneeze. Don't make a sound. He described that as the most terrifying night of his life. He couldn't sleep a wink. But at the end of the Holocaust, this family of 12 survived. They went off to America, and on the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, they invited this family, this Polish Gentile family, to New York, where there are over 100 descendants of these 12 people, over 100 descendants living proud Jewish lives in the United States. And they invited over this family to pay tribute to them. And I actually went to Yad Vashem shortly after this visit, and I found the tree in the Avenue of the Righteous Gentiles planted in the honor of this man's father. Remarkable story. Why am I telling you this story? Because from a Jewish perspective, we need to understand that in order to be spiritual, in order to have a relationship with Hashem, it's not reliant on necessarily being Jewish. However, if people want to become Jewish, they're welcome to, but that's not what's going to necessarily get them that relationship with the Almighty. And this is further demonstrated and explained in temple times, right? We know that the temple wasn't just there to benefit Jews. When King Solomon built the temple, he specifically asked God to listen to the prayers of non-Jews who would come to the temple, right? This pasuk in Malachim Aleph, and also to the strangers who may not be of your people of Israel. They'll come from afar, and they shall hear you, and they shall hear your great name, and they will also be able to play a part of it. And we know also from the Gemara in Sukkah, Eliezer says that when there were 70 offerings brought on Sukkot, for the merit of the 70 nations of the world. We know that during the week of Sukkot, there were 70 offerings, and the Talmud explains this corresponded to the 70 nations of the world. And in fact, the Gemara goes on to tell us that when the Romans destroyed the temple, they said, would we have realized that this was actually for our own benefit, they would never have destroyed it themselves, because they realized there was a benefit for the entire mankind. What about the non-Jew who decides they actually want to convert to Judaism? So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. The Shulchan Aruch in various places, Simon 2668, discusses in great detail what a non-Jew needs to do in order to convert to Judaism. In order for a non-Jew to convert to Judaism, they need to, of course, undergo the conversion process. And this process, known as Gerus, is described in the Gemara in Krisus, quoted by Brisa. There are three key components to become Jewish. Of course, circumcision if it's a male, immersion in a mikvah, and in temple times, it was bringing a sacrifice. Now, the Gemara knows, of course, nowadays that's not possible. And instead, right, what happens nowadays? It's what we call Kabbalat mitzvot, right? They're accepting on themselves, according to the Shulchan Aruch, the requirement to keep mitzvot. The three M's, right? Mitzvot, milah, and the mitzvah, and mikvah, right? These are the three mitzvahs in order to go through Gerus. Mitzvahs, what does it mean? You need to believe in Hashem, you believe in the divinity of the Torah, and accept all of the 613 commandments. Milah, right? A male has to undergo circumcision by a qualified mohel, and the Shulchan Aruch describes what that involves. A male convert who enters the congregation of Jews is obliged to have a circumcision. What happens if he was already circumcised, as many Muslim people are? What happens if he'd already previously had a circumcision? So we do something called the hatofas dam, where a drop of blood is taken so as to represent this mitzvah. I actually phoned a mohel today. I phoned Dr. Spitzer to ask him about this process, if it ever happens nowadays, and he told me it happens quite regularly. And it's a very simple procedure, hatofas dam, where it's done in the presence of the Rabbanim, three witnesses, to show that this person has taken upon himself to have milah. Obviously, if he hasn't had that, he'll have a full brit milah, but that's really, really interesting. A special bracha is made, different bracha that you make at a bris of a child, because here, this person is so to speak, being like Avraham Avinu. He's undertaking the obligations of becoming a Jew wholeheartedly, not because he was just born a Jew, but because he wants to be a Jew. In fact, in the Torah, it describes bris milah on two separate occasions, reflecting this. One occasion with Avraham Avinu, and one with Yitzchak. And the key difference was one was born Jewish, and one became Jewish. The next discussion in the Shulchan Aruch is the concept of turning them away. When somebody approaches, as Dayan Binstock said last week, the Bet Din to ask to become Jewish, we don't encourage them. And we said earlier, there are many ways to be spiritually connected. And once you become Jewish, it's a huge undertaking. And when the convert comes, we ask, what prompted you to convert? The Shulchan Aruch, which was obviously written 400 years ago, describes. We say to them, what pushes you to join a people who have been so oppressed, so troubled? We quote the Pasuk in Yirmiyah of all the troubles we've gone through in the exiles. And if the person is still wanting to join, then we accept them immediately. And we allow them to go through the process. Of course, a person going through Gerus, they need to be informed of all the mitzvot. They need to know what it means to be Jewish. They need to go through a rigorous program of education. They need to go through an in-depth learning program to make sure they understand what is involved, to learn about schar v'onesh, reward and punishment, to know about all the mitzvot, to know about Shabbat, about kashrut, about what's involved in joining the Jewish faith. The Beth Din obviously plays a key role in the conversion, informing them, making sure they go through this process, the process of circumcision, and mikvah, both for man and woman, obviously, and it needs to be done before three people, etc., etc. So those are some details of halachot of gerus, of what is involved. And I'm just going to press pause now on this presentation and just see if there's anyone has any comments or questions on anything I've said so far. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you've got any questions.
I have a question, but I don't know if you'll be bringing this up. When I've spoken to Chabad, they say that our soul gets an extra part when we're Jewish, so when they convert. Do modern Orthodox believe that the soul is changed to become a Jewish soul? It gets
so this is getting very mystical. We're not going to be getting into all the mystic elements of this evening, but we do certainly believe that there is an aspect of that. I'm going to reflect on this at the end of the evening with a final story I'm going to share with you. I heard actually today from somebody who went through conversion, and it touches upon this idea. We'll come back to it. It's a great point, and we will certainly come back to it. Okay, moving on. Let's talk a little bit more now about conversion. So there's a fascinating Gemara. This is a Gemara in Pesachim. The Talmud tells us, and we know throughout history that we've been enriched by converts. And Rabbi Eliezer says that the Jewish people were exiled only so as converts would join them. In other words, we're scattered amongst the world, give people an opportunity to join the Jewish people through the conversion process. That's a fascinating idea, if you think about it, that throughout Jewish history,
rubbing your head the whole evening.
Throughout Jewish history,
What?
throughout Jewish history, there has been this remarkable amount of very special individuals who have joined us. And ironically, much of our history, Judaism, being Jewish was extremely dangerous. It was, we experienced a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of pogroms and other suffering, but yet there were brave individuals who followed their hearts and they joined. And Rabbi Eliezer in the Gemara in Pesachim speaks about them in glowing terms, about this amazing idea that this was the reason why we have the exile, to give people the chance to join the Jewish people. So we're going to go through and talk about some amazing converts now, and we're going to start with the Torah. Now, can anyone tell me, feel free to unmute yourself, of any great converts you can think of in the Torah itself? And I've put a couple of clues in the pictures on the slide.
Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva.
So Rabbi Akiva, according to some opinions, was a convert, but that's not in the Torah. That's in the...
Yisro, father-in-law of Moses.
Excellent. Yisro, correct.
Ruth.
Yes, sorry.
Ruth is in the Nach, not in the Torah itself. It comes after the Torah.
Shifra and Puah in the Book of Exodus.
Shifra and Puah were Jewish. They were Yocheved and Miriam. They were one of the 70 who came down. They weren't necessarily converts, but you're getting close. If you look in the picture on the right from 2 weeks ago's Torah portion, it's an image reflecting that. Does anyone know who that's supposed to be in the blue gown?
Potiphar?
That is Batya. Who was Batya? Correct. The daughter of Paro. The daughter of Pharaoh. And actually, in the image, in the picture, you can see in this painting, Batya handing baby Moses to Yocheved for nursing. And she was known as Batya. And she appears in the Torah as the daughter of Pharaoh, who found baby Moses floating in the Nile. She takes him into the palace and she raises him. And according to the Gemara, Batya, right, she'd been in the river. Why? She was going to the mikveh. She was cleansing herself from the avodah zarah, from the idol worship in her father's house. She was converting to the Jewish religion. And a righteous woman she was. Her very name, Batya, means the daughter of God. And the tradition tells us that actually she was one of the few individuals who entered Gan Eden, who entered paradise without even experiencing death. She was somebody clearly very great. The picture on the left, which is a little bit dark, is a picture of Moses taking his leave from Yisro. It's a famous painting. Now, Yisro, we know, was the father-in-law of Moses. He was a very learned priest. He explored the details of every single religion known to man of that time, and he joined the Israelites. He says that, like the Torah describes, he says, I know the God of Israel is greater than any other God. And when he sees Moses single-handedly trying to look after the Jewish people in the Midbar, is the one who comes up with a great solution of creating judges, judges to assist him, and he goes down as somebody incredibly great. So much so, a Torah portion is named after him. Now in Novi, we've got more. If you want to guess some of the pictures over here of the great converts in Nach, it's written on the slides. Rachav, Ruth, and Obadiah. Let me tell you about these three very briefly. So Rachav, right, the sages tell us she was exceptionally beautiful. And as the people of Israel were about to enter the land of Israel, they sent scouts to the city of Jericho. And Rachav is described as a zonah. She was a harlot or an innkeeper. And she hosted these scouts who were checking out the land for the second time, the second set of spies in the book of Joshua. She helps them evade capture, and she is rewarded for her kindness. And we are told that she later converts to Judaism, so much so we are told that she goes on to marry Joshua, and one of her descendants is Jeremiah, and Ezekiel is another one of her descendants. Now Ruth, the book of Ruth, which of course we read on which festival?
Shavuot.
Shavuot, of course, which is the story of conversion. It's the quintessential example of conversion, because Ruth, she's a Moabite princess. She's widowed from her husband, and she faithfully follows her former mother-in-law to Bethlehem. And she famously says this beautiful pasuk in Tanakh, one of the most beautiful pasukim in the whole of Tanakh, right? Wherever you will go, I will go. Wherever you will lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. In fact, that verse is some of the earliest sources for some of the laws of conversion, right? Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I lodge. You have to live in with a Jewish family to go through the conversion process to understand what it means to become Jewish. And her devotion was noticed by Boaz, who was one of the wealthy leaders of the time, and she marries him, and she has a great grandson, which is of course King David, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now we read that on Shavuot, which is the festival where, so to speak, we all become converts when we receive the Torah. Another famous convert is, of course, Obadiah. Now, the book of Obadiah, it's very short, just 21 verses. And he was a very great leader. And he explains that right, why did God choose Obadiah to give prophecy regarding it was the destruction of he gave the prophecy that ultimately Israel will overcome Edom. Because why? He was an Edomite convert. And therefore it was deemed he was the most suitable candidate to bring that prophecy to the Jewish people. And he was actually a minister of the evil king Achav and Queen Jezebel. And the Navi describes, the Tanakh describes him as somebody who was Yirei Elokim, he feared God. And he was also a very famous convert. So that's going through the Torah period and the period of Novi. When we move now to the Second Temple period, a couple of the most famous converts is, of course, Shmaya and Avtalion. Now, they were descendants actually of Sancherev from Assyria, and these two scholars, they served together as a zug, as a pair, as the chief justice of the Sanhedrin, and also the High Court of Jerusalem. And we are told that they were two of the greatest. They were greatly accomplished in Torah knowledge and wisdom. We know some of the Mishnayot from Pirkei Avot, the famous Mishnah, Shmaya v'Avtalion kiblu mehem. They were students of Hillel, and Shmaya v'Avtalion kiblu mehem. Shmaya omer ohev es hamalacha, sones harabonos, v'altis fadel l'roshus. Right, this famous Mishnah where it says love work, loathe mastery over others, and avoid too much of a relationship with the government. Now, Avtalion, by the way, was a Greek name, and one of his best teachings was being careful with your words, and I better not digress and learn from his teachings. There are many, many more converts we can talk about. I'm going to see how much time we have for this evening, but another famous convert was Ben Bagbag and Ben Heihei. Now, these are rather unusual names. Has anyone heard of Ben Bagbag or Ben Heihei? So they are described also in the Mishnah of Pirkei Avot. Now, what's interesting, and this is fascinating, and when I was researching this, I never knew this, but Ben Bagbag and Ben Heihei, they lived in the following generation after Shmaya and Avtalion. They were a pair of converts. Why do they have these very strange names, Ben Bagbag and Ben Heihei? And the answer, presumably, was because of the dangers involved in converting to Judaism at that time. So their names were kind of code names. They were going by these aliases, not to give up their identity. But actually, the letter Hey, why was he called Ben Hey? Because the letter Hey was added to both Abraham and Sarah. And when a convert converts to Judaism, they're the child of Abraham and Sarah. So he called himself Ben Hey. He thought that was a great code name. What about Ben Bugbug? So Bugbug, he took it one step further, because base and gimel makes up the numerical value of 5. Base is 2, gimel is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, which is Hey. So again, referring to that. But also, alternatively, Ben Bugbug is an acronym for Ben Ger or Ben Gioret. He was the son of a convert and the son of a convertess. So for whatever reason, they have these names, and they were very famous. They're very famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot as well. End of chapter 1, Ben Bugbug, Omer, Ben Bugbug said that you should turn over the Torah, learn it. There's so much wisdom in it. He recognized the wisdom of Judaism. He recognized what it means to be a Jew and why it's such a special religion to be a part of. Okay. Moving forward, we know that in the Talmud, in the Gemara and Sukkah, we learn about Queen Helena. For anyone who's learned the first page of the Sukkah, we know that the Sukkah is not allowed to be higher than 20 amas high. And the Gemara tells us that Queen Helena had a very tall Sukkah. And the commentators discuss why. Why would she have had an invalid Sukkah? Why was it so tall? And the Chachamim didn't protest, perhaps because a woman's not obligated to sit in a sukkah, perhaps because it was just an extra meeting place, as some Rishonim explain. But the Breita tells the story of Queen Helena. She was a legendary queen from the period of the Second Temple. She converted to Judaism, and she had this remarkable sukkah, and her it's said to be her sarcophagus is actually in the Israel Museum. I've put a picture of it on this slide for you to see. But she was known to be a remarkable woman who, despite coming from an idol worship country, she left as queen. She gave up her royal status because she wanted to accept the belief of Judaism. And despite having her sons killed, right, and despite going through, her 7 sons were said, to have toiled significantly in Torah and become accomplished scholars in their own right, she obviously gave up a huge amount to become part of the Jewish people. Another famous convert is, of course, Onkelos. If you haven't heard of Onkelos, open any traditional Chumash, as you can see here on the right. Now, Onkelos was the nephew of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. And Hadrian had, the story is told about Onkelos, the following story is told, that he was very well versed in Roman and Greek culture. And he left his family, despite being from the emperor's family, despite great wealth, great power, he converted to Judaism. And the story is told, his uncle Caesar, right, sent soldiers to arrest him. And Onkelos drew close to them, and he started discussing Torah with them. And these soldiers who'd come to arrest him, instead, what happened? They converted to Judaism. So Caesar sent another group of soldiers. But this time he warned them. He said, don't speak to him, don't exchange a word with him. And when they got there, they were about to go in. They noticed on his doorway a mezuzah. And they got inquisitive. He placed his hand on it and he laughed. And they said to him, why are you laughing? And he said, normally a king sits within while his servants guard him from without. But that's not the case with God. His servants are within while he guards from without. We say in the Shema that Hashem guards us on our doorposts with a mezuzah, and he ended up converting them as well. So he was really quite a famous convert in Judaism. I'm just going to pause here to see if there's any comments or questions on anything we've said so far. I want it just to be me giving a soliloquy here. Any comments or questions? And then I've got 2 incredible, more contemporary stories to share with you. Okay, that's good. I've put you all to sleep perfectly. That's fine. Okay, let me share with you some really fascinating stuff. Now, I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to see this tremendous book. My colleague, Rabbi Pinny Dunner, wrote this book called Mavericks, Mystics, and False Messiahs. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And there is a chapter in this book dedicated to the next person who I'm going to tell you about briefly. The next person I want to tell you about, his name is Lord George Gordon. And for those of you who were at Tikkun Lal Shavuot a couple of years ago, Diane Minstock spoke extensively about him. He was born in 1751. He lived 1793. He was a British politician. And he was known, right, for his name is associated with the Gordon riots of 1780. He was significantly eccentric and quite a flighty personality. And he was born to Scottish nobility, into a Scottish family in London in 1751. And he was blessed with a very keen sense of justice. And he became quite distressed with the treatment of slaves in America. While he was stationed in Jamaica in the Royal Navy, he saw what was going on, and it led him to go into a life of politics. And as a member of parliament, he became involved in various issues around the time of the American War of Independence. And he was later charged, later acquitted as well, of treason through this march of the Gordon Riots, 1780. And he converted to Judaism. And after his religious views came to light, it caused a tremendous amount of controversy. He took the name Yisrael, and he was connected with the Jewish community of Birmingham, and he was described to have a full beard and wear Jewish clothing, and he devoted himself to the study of Torah. He was later imprisoned, and his family got involved at the time as well. The story is told that how in prison he demanded to only have a kosher diet. He observed Shabbat and festivals, and he used to play the violin to downtrodden prisoners. So that's something really interesting about Lord Gordon, and I've just shared with you some notes about him because there's just so much to say, and I recommend you buy this book and you certainly read it. Let me share with you one other. Now this as well, I read this recently. This story was actually an article about this next person I'm going to tell you about in the Hamodia magazine. And this was really quite amazing. This is the story. Oh, sorry. First, Avraham Ben Avraham. Has anyone heard of Avraham Ben Avraham? It's another amazing story. One second. Let me just share with you details of Avraham Ben Avraham. So Avraham Ben Avraham, he's buried very near the Vilna Gaon. I don't know if any of you have ever been to the burial place of the Vilna Gaon, but he was somebody who converted in the 18th century. He was a legendary member of the Polish nobility, and he was also a remarkable convert. But we don't have time to go into everyone in full detail, but I want to conclude with one remarkable story. This is the story of a Quaker who became a Jew. His name was Warza Cressen. He was a Ger Tzedek. He converted to Judaism in, you can see he was born in 1798, died in 1860. And he was born into a Quaker family in Philadelphia. And he was appointed as the first American consul to Jerusalem. And the story of his life is just remarkable. It's a remarkable, remarkable story that it's really worth, I share this article with you, just reading fully about his life. In his early years, he published a pamphlet called the Babylon the Great. And it was in that he basically spoke about he was exploring religion, and he didn't understand the ways, he didn't agree with the ways of the Quakers and the way they were leading their lives. And he felt that there was much more to it. And he started exploring and learning about other religions, started having lots of other interests and studying a great deal. And he ended up finding his way to a synagogue in Philadelphia, a leading Jewish congregation called, what was the congregation called? I think it was called Mikveh Yisrael, right? And here you can see in this picture, right, one of the scholars from there, there's a certain siddur that was used in that synagogue. And he connected with the synagogue, he learned a great deal about Judaism, and he ends up converting to Judaism. And not only does he end up converting to Judaism, but he ends up being the first American consul to Jerusalem. In May the 17th, 1844, he travels, he leaves his family, he sets sail for Jerusalem. He writes in his diary, in the spring of 1844, I left everything near and dear to me. I left my wife, I left my 6 lovely children, and he goes to Israel because he wants to follow his dream, and he wants to do something amazing. And it's an amazing story of how actually, before he even arrives in Israel, the State Department changed their mind to this appointment, and they want to take away this position from him. But he doesn't find this out until he's already there and it's too late, and he just carries on anyway. And when he makes his way back to America, his wife and all his family, so disillusioned by his conversion, they actually think that he's gone insane. They think he's gone insane. There's actually a really interesting story with some halachic controversy. We learned earlier about that. One of the things a convert needs to do is go to the mikveh. Now, one interesting thing about somebody going through the conversion process is they're not allowed to keep Shabbat fully until they're actually Jewish. So while they're going through the education of becoming a Jew, even if they're keeping Shabbat, then they're not using electronics, they're not cooking, they're not driving. They have to do one prohibition every Shabbat till they're actually Jewish. And although, right, they're learning to be Jewish, they're not allowed to actually keep Shabbat to the full extent. And in 1848, there was a very famous halachic controversy, which was presented to leading European rabbis in Germany and other parts of Europe at the time, to discuss a very question of what happened to, there was a certain non-Jew who was circumcised. He'd gone through Gerus for the circumcision part. He'd accepted all the mitzvot. And on the following Shabbat, he hadn't yet fully recovered from his circumcision. And then he went to the mikveh on Shabbat, which actually the Shulchan Aruch says you shouldn't be going to the mikveh on Shabbat, but that's neither here nor there. He went to the mikveh, and the rabbis were informed that the convert is observing Shabbat very carefully. However, another rabbi said that due to the fact that he hadn't yet entered the mikveh, he must not observe Shabbat fully, because he has to perform, as we said, one of the prohibited acts. And it was late in the day, and there was a whole controversy whether he should violate Shabbat or should not violate Shabbat. Was he considered Jewish? Was he not considered Jewish? This story, brought down in various halachic sources, refers to our dear friend over here, to our dear friend Warza Cressen. So that's the story of Warza Cressen. He's actually buried on Har HaZeitim, Mount of Olives. You can see here a picture of his tombstone. He made a new life for himself in Israel, and he ended up being an Orthodox Sephardi Jew, and a prominent Jew in the community. He did a great deal for Israel in those early years. And here you can see that his gravestone was uncovered in 2013, and he was buried there. I want to end this evening, before we open up for questions, with one remarkable story. Now, I know many of you saw my interview with the great Gaffney. You can see here on the left a picture of Pete, who is an amazing guy. And if you did not watch the interview, I recommend you go on and watch it. But I phoned Pete today, I was chatting to him thanking him about the opportunity of interviewing him and discussing the shir this evening. And he said to me, Yoni, I've got to just tell you something really amazing that you should share in your shir. He said, for 26 years, my mother and father, who comes from a Catholic family, they have hanging in on their mantelpiece at home a pasuk from Tanakh, a pasuk from Jeremiah. And he never thought about it twice. And when he converted and became Jewish, his mother phoned him up and said to him, I need to tell you something. When I was pregnant with you, I was 40 years old. You were my 5th child. And I got married very young, as Catholic people do, and I'd had a lot of children. And when I heard I was pregnant with the 5th child, I was thinking, should I not, humming and hawing, talking about abortion. And I was going to go and see the priest, but I was too embarrassed, and I was in a terrible state. I was in a terrible, terrible state. And one day I was in the local supermarket, and I almost broke down in tears. And this woman, Rebecca, who she was, never seen her before, never seen her since. She came over to me, she said, are you okay? What's the matter? And I opened up to her, I explained to her, I'm going through this terrible trauma. And she said, I've got a Bible in my bag, I've got a Tanakh. Let's open the Bible and let's open it and find a verse. Maybe that will give you some inspiration. And she opened the Tanakh, and it came to this pasuk in Yirmiyah. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you prophet to the nations. And it landed on this verse. And the woman was so moved by this, she decided she was going ahead, she was going to have this baby. This baby ended up becoming a Jew, became the guy who I interviewed. And all his childhood life, for 26 years, this picture was hanging on the mantelpiece of this verse in Jeremiah, and he never had any understanding why. And I just thought this was the most remarkable story. And I think this goes back to the question we had earlier about the soul. We believe that a Jewish person does have a slightly different neshama. We believe when a person does convert, they now become fully part of the Jewish people. And that's absolutely part of it. So thank you very, very much for listening. I'm now going to allow you please to unmute yourself if you have any questions. I can see a few questions in the chat. And the name of the book again is Mavericks, Mystics, and False Messiahs from Rabbi Penny Dunner. I really, really recommend it. And if anyone has any other questions, I'm very delighted to try and answer them now. Any questions?
Yoni, it's Nick. Hi. Wasn't there a piece I read many years ago, something about when a person's a ger, they have to, or they can, if they want to, eat the Pesach sacrifice, the lamb?
Once they've converted?
Yeah. Is that part of the conversion, or is it just?
No, it's not part of the conversion. Once they're converted, they're fully part of.
So where does it come into it? Then?
What I think you may have heard is that non-Jewish people don't take part in the Yom Tov meal in the same way that Jewish people would, and when they're going through that process, they're not fully Jewish. They wouldn't take part. But once they're through the conversion process, they're considered fully Jewish in every way. Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions before we say good evening? So thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And next week is the final.
Obviously, everyone here this evening will be at tomorrow's Minyan Shachris 8:30. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a Minyan tomorrow for Shachrit. We've got tomorrow night special program for ladies with Stock. Thursday night there's Parsha Share, and every morning we have Shachrit at 8:30 on this Zoom account. And also, if any of you want to do a Hebrew reading refresher course, we have sent an email out about that. And lots of exciting stuff coming up, especially our lively Shabbat and Havdalah program. So please join us. And if anyone needs anything from the team, we're here for you. And thanks so much for joining me this evening.